Good day, my esteemed viewers. My name is Yusuf Olayinka Shugbesan. I have a PhD in test and measurement. I also teach test and measurement, educational assessment, research method, as well as teacher education courses. Today, we are going to be talking about one of the key aspects of foundation course in education. As you all know, educational courses are one of those things that teacher or pre-service teachers will offer to be grounded in education. So if you are a pre-service teacher, meaning that you are an undergraduate in education, or you are in college of education, it's either you are going to offer teaching courses where you will be exposed to teaching, how to go about teaching, educational psychology, sociology, and one of those courses that you also be exposed to is test and measurement. In some places, they refer to it as measurement and evaluation. So, summarily, when you are looking at education, it's divided into majorly two. It's either you are teaching or you are assessing. So those are the two main wings by which, if you possess, you'll be able to fly well. If you are able to teach well, you should be also able to assess well as an educationist. So today, I will be introducing you to basic concepts in tests and measurement. So when we say basic concepts, so it means that we are going to be giving a brief hint into issues surrounding test and measurement as a course in the undergraduate, or that it applies to teacher education, whether in the colleges of education, as the case may be. So more importantly, when we look at basic concept in test and measurement, we have to look at what is test in itself. More importantly, most of us that have attended primary, secondary schools, we have been attempting tests. We have been writing tests, so it is not a new thing to us. However, tests are a set of questions that are used to evaluate the extent to which an individual learner possess a given characteristics. So they are the instrument that is used to assess or determine the extent to which learning has occurred. Because we are talking about education now. So when we say test, we are specifically looking at educational tests. Unlike tests, even in medicine, where we have HIV tests, we have a malaria test to determine whether an individual possesses or is afflicted with that kind of disease. So in education, we want to evaluate, we want to determine or elicit or obtain information as regards whether learner possess a particular characteristics that are directly related to education, or specifically that are having a psychological relation to education. So it's either it is educational test or psychological test. So I'm saying psychological test because even in education, there are some psychological characteristics that are of the affective component that can also be assessed by the teacher that will have implication on the educational component, or that will directly affect learners' performance. So when you are trying to obtain information about the extent to which a learner possesses a particular characteristics of interest, you use the instrument called test. So basically, when we say tests are instruments that are used to elicit information about the extent to which an individual possesses a latent ability. So when we say latent ability, it means that there are hidden characteristics that you may not see obviously. Even if you see them, you have to confirm whether they really exist or not. So tests are used to obtain information. So apart from that, since we say we are looking at introduction to test and measurement, we also have to look at measurement as a concept. So when we say measure, from ordinary usage of words, that means you are trying to determine how much of a something. So that implies that when we say measurement, generally you are trying to look at how much of a something does a particular individual possess. So when we are in education now, when we say measurement, we are trying to assign numbers following specific or specified guidelines. We are trying to attach numeric or quantification to a particular attribute or characteristics. So let us go back to tests. We said tests are instruments that are used to elicit information about the extent to which an individual possesses particular characteristics. So that implies that when we say tests, what should come to our mind is that they are instruments. Instruments that are used to obtain information about what? A particular latent variable. So if tests are instruments, that variable that is obtained from tests may have quantification or numeric value. So measurement is the rule that is used to assign number. So when you say measure, measurement in that sense is assignment of number to what? To that variable. And when we say that variable, it means that you are trying to assign number to that variable following a specified rules or guideline. So that implies there are some rules that guides how you measure. So that will take us to a sub-component of measurement that has to do with what we call scale of measurement or level of measurement, as the case may be. So they are usually used interchangeably. So more importantly, when we look at scale of measurement, level of measurement or scale of measurement, we are trying to look at what are those rules that will allow you to assign numbers. So it's either you are measuring nominally, so nominal level, ordinally, that will make us have ordinal level of measurement. You are using the interval level, or you are using the ratio level of measurement. So that implies that it's either you are measuring nominally, ordinally, intervally, or using the ratio level of measurement. So you are trying to assign numbers to a variable following a specified rule or guideline. So if you are using nominal, majorly it's for identification. You are trying to identify or categorize. So when we say identification, nominal level of measurement or scale of measurement just implies that you are identifying the extent to which an individual possesses, or you are trying to say, let us just use this to identify. In general term, for example, when you assign a particular number or attribute, so that you can just use it to say, okay, this is this person. For example, in the school system, you decide to say this is GSS 1A, this is GSS 1B, this is GSS 1C, this is GSS 1D. They are nominal level of measurement. You are only assigning numbers to or attributes to be able to just identify. They don't have any other characteristics than just to identify. A common example is numbers that are given for football players. Number 10, number 1, their identity. Though those identity have positions where they can play, but at least they are used to identify that this is player number 10, this is player number 1, this is player number 5, as the case may be. But apart from identification, when you are trying to measure or assign number using the number in a way that it has other implication. When I say other implication, that means it is ranked. Then you are measuring at the ordinal level. So when you say ordinal scale of measurement, what should come to your mind is what? Ranking. So when you are ranking, you are trying to say one is better than the other is better than the other. Unlike nominal level that has to just with basic identification. Somebody that is first position is better than somebody that has a second position, is better than somebody that has a third position, and that. So if you just basically say 1, 2, 3, 4, for example, in your street, your number may be number 1, somebody's house number may be number 5, that is nominal. You are only using to identify. But if it is ordinal, it means that house number 1 is greater than, which is not in reality. So in the school system, when you are measuring the ordinal, that means every number has an implication, a rank implication, ascendingly or descendingly. One is greater than the other, one is greater than the other. And let me cite an example. When you say age, student age, somebody that is 10 years old and somebody that is 12 years old, 12 is greater than 10 ordinarily because it has other implication. You are not just assigning 12 and 10. 12 is greater than what? Is greater than 10. And likewise 15 is also greater than 12. That is measuring, assigning numbers with ordinal consideration, with rank consideration. The third one, apart from that, one thing you should also know is that this is the lowest level of measurement. When I say lowest level, that is the lowest level you can have. But the previous level possess the characteristics of this level, possess the characteristics of the previous one. So it means that ordinal level of measurement possess the characteristics of nominal. So interval will also possess the characteristics of ordinal and nominal. Ratio will possess the characteristics of interval, ordinal, and nominal level. So when you look at interval, just like the name implies, interval, trying to look at categorization, categorization. The interval level or scale of measurement assign number based on categories. If you say learners between age 9 and 12, learners between age 13 and 15, learners between age 16 and 20, what you are trying to say is that everything that happens within those range, you will account for it. So you are not looking at the number, you are looking at the range of the numbers. In the school system, when we are doing assessments and we say 0 to 39 is a fail, what we are doing is that we are assigning number at the interval level. When we say 70 to 100 is an A, what we are saying, we are categorizing and we are saying that is our interval. So anybody that scored 99 is going to have A. Anybody that scores that 70 is going to have A, just because we have given that's the specified rule that is used to assign, and that is the rule we will follow, and we are measuring at the interval at that stage. But one thing that is certain is that that interval level can also be used to order. can also be used to identify. When we say order, somebody that has A is greater than somebody that has B, it's also greater than somebody that has C, somebody that has D, and somebody that has E. That's ordinal implication. So like I have said earlier, all of them, this possess the characteristics of the 3, this possess the characteristics of the 2, this possess this characteristics, this is the lowest level of measurement, and this is the highest level of measurement or scale of measurement, as the case may be. So more importantly, interval level can have rank implication. A greater than B, B greater than C, C greater than D, D greater than E. Can also have identification. When you say identification, what do you have? I have an A. It shows that we have identified you with A. So whether your A is 99, whether your A is 70 or 71, A is A. Are you getting the point? So that means that for those in the category of A, we have identified you to have A. Whether your A is 99, whether your A is 82, whether your A is 71, A is A. That's nominal level. We are trying to use it to what? To identify people in that bracket. The ratio level, which is the highest level. One thing is certain. All these ones does not have true zero characteristics. What do I mean? What do I imply? They don't really start from zero, and they are not equidistant from one another. I have to repeat that. They do not have, all these ones does not have zero characteristics, which implies that they do not really start from zero. Even if they start from zero, they don't have equidistant characteristics. Equidistance meaning that there is no equal distance, there is no equal range between one to the other, between one to the other. So if you are saying interval, a 0 to 39 is F in the school system, a 40 to 44 is E, does that really mean that between 40 and 44, that interval is small compared to 0 to 39? But we don't mind, because we are measuring at the interval level. But at the ratio level, the next rank, the next interval, the next interval, the next interval, they will possess what? They will possess equidistance. So when you are measuring at the ratio level, it means that you are taking into consideration the interval, the ordinal, and the nominal with a true characteristics of 0. So meaning when a measurement possesses a true characteristic of 0, if it is from 0 to 20, it will then be from 21 to 40, it will then be from 41 to 60, it will be from 61 to, and that will imply that from the highest to the lowest, if you divide, there will be multiplicative and divisive characteristics that will allow you to say, okay, for those in this rank, there are 4 times those in this rank. If you divide this by 4, it will allow us to have 4 categorization, which is interval. That means it has true 0 characteristics. Let me cite another general example. So this one is what? True 0 characteristics. Don't mind the writing, but one thing is certain. Once there is a true 0 characteristics, it will possess the characteristics of interval, ordinal, and nominal, as the case may be. This is the highest, and why this is the what? The lowest. In the school system, specifically in the university as undergraduate, even in colleges of education, we have what we call CGPA, which is cumulative grade point average. From my explanation, CGPA will give you from 0 to 5. But it doesn't have true 0 characteristics. Why? There is no equidistance. So somebody that has a first class from 4.5 to 5, somebody that has a second class upper division from 3.5 to 4.49. Look at the distance. That means they only stop at interval level. But one thing is certain, it doesn't have equidistance, but it is measured at the interval. So that means it's not measured at the ratio level. So CGPA is for categorizing those that are first class, those that are second class upper, second class lower, third class, and pass. With that, it has ordinal implication. Even though it is used for it is measuring at the interval level, A first class is better than a second class upper, a second class upper is better than a second class lower, and like that and like that. It also has nominal level. Those in first class, if they are to come out, even if you have a 5.0 or you have a 4.5 on dot, you are still a first class. So if we identify all of you, we'll pack all of you in one category. So that's how you have to know that once you are measuring at a higher level, it will possess the characteristics of the previous level. So this is measurement briefly. Other things that we have to know is that, and it's usually used interchangeably, is another concept we call assessment. Somebody will say, how is test different from assessment? That we used to say we have educational tests, that we have educational assessment. Assessment is broad. You cannot just say you are doing educational tests. Some people will call it educational test is the same thing as educational assessment. But one thing is certain. Educational assessment is a broad categorization because it involves another thing. So when I say educational assessment, unlike tests that we have initially introduced you to, it implies that if test is measuring and assigning numbers, so assessment is both quantitative and qualitative in nature. That implies that when you are doing assessment, you are measuring. So you are measuring, that's measurement plus qualitative evidence. So assessment is broad as it takes into consideration use of variety of approaches to gather evidence. So when you are doing assessment in the class, it goes beyond administering tests to obtain numbers or assign numbers by measuring quantitatively. It also allows you to assign explore qualitative evidence. Let me cite an example. You are teaching your students in the class and you want to do assessment. Though most times somebody will say we are doing assessment, so they will only be testing. So the process of using tests is testing. So if you are just testing, but you want to do assessment, after your test, those that used to come to class, those that used to pay attention, those that used to submit assignment as I went you, all those things, you now use it to also make decisions at the end of the day. It means that you have broadly gathered evidence beyond just measuring, and that is assessment in the real sense. But when you are just assigning numbers and you are still calling assessment, that means you are still measuring. You are only using that test to obtain information, and you are only using quantitative evidence from that score. You are only using quantitative evidence obtained from tests. But when you are gathering evidence around the learner or learning activity that you use to support in research, anyway, that's another thing, we call it triangulation. In research, we call it triangulation. That implies that you have gathered quantitative evidence. You want to also gather qualitative evidence. Somebody that is not attentive, is not always coming to class, is not doing assignments, suddenly the person now scores 60-60. Something will tell you that maybe cheating, maybe other factors that will inflate score. In fact, if you are really assessing, you can call the person, investigate further, and so on and so forth, and vice versa. Somebody that is always coming to your class, doing everything, and there's a failure. It's either you call the person, maybe there are some other psychological issues affecting that person. And if that is really assessment in the real sense. So assessment is broad. So assessment is a process of obtaining sorting, arranging, analyzing data using variety of approach so that you can make decisions about curricular, program or educational policy. So it is usually used to obtain information from many sources, not just one sources, to optimize learning. So that's assessment. And finally, under the concept that we'll treat is that we are going to look at evaluation. Like I have said, these tests, measurements, assessments, and evaluation, usually they are used interchangeably depending on the concept, depending on the aspect as if you want to use them. But one thing is fundamental, they are different when you use them in their uniqueness. Evaluation is like a father of all. I repeat, evaluation is like a father of all. Tests, measurement, and assessment are a part of a whole. When I say part of a whole, evaluation is like a whole. Before you can evaluate, you must have or you might have tested, measured, and assessed. One thing is certain, you cannot jump to evaluation without either testing, measuring. Somebody will say, if you want to measure, must we test? If you are measuring, how do you arrive at your measurement? That means you are testing. So then if you want to give judgment, because evaluation is about value judgment. What do I call it? I call it giving value judgment. Value judgment. That implies that before you can say this student has failed, that's an evaluative statement. That you have failed this course. It implies that you have tested, you have assigned number, you have assessed, you realize that that person cannot pass from your assessment. Then you then give value judgment. So evaluation is giving value judgment as it's used to determine the extent to which learning activity has occurred. So you are determining the worth and the merit of learning activity, and you then give value judgment. So when value judgment is given, evaluation has occurred. But when there is no value judgment, you are only assessing. So if you assess, you gather evidence, but you are not giving judgment, you are doing assessment. The moment you determine the merit and worth of an educational activity, and you now give value judgment, the evaluation has occurred. So let me cite an example. In the school system, you taught, for example, test and measurement. You now want to determine whether student has learned over time. You gave them tests obtained from your instructions. You give them tests. You then assign numbers by scoring the test, after which probably you give assignments, you give them group work, you gather evidence beyond just one source, then probably attendance and all those things. That means you are assessing. It's beyond just quantitative. You are also looking at other things. Then you now determine those that have passed and those that have failed. And they are able to see that these ones have passed, these ones have failed. That means you have done evaluation. By the time you are graduating in a school, they are giving your certificate, they have evaluated the whole program. That's why they are certified based on that. They have given you, they will say, this person is worthy in learning and character. You hereby confer this degree. That's an evaluation. For them to say, though in recent times, we in measurement, we are trying to say, how do you measure worthy in character? That's an affective component. But that is another thing for another day. But basically, schools pronounce that, and that's evaluative statement. And it is used to make decision about you. So with your certificate, they have already given decision. Let me cite myself as an example. When I was to obtain my first school leaving certificate, something struck my mind when I was looking at the comments of the head teacher, or let's say head mistress, because she was a female. She wrote, Yusuf is an academician to the core. always ready to learn new things. That is an evaluative statement. Before she can write that such, she has tested me along with other teachers. They have measured, they have seen my scores, they have assessed probably my activity in the school, and at the end they were felt this should go with me because that is what they can give. That's the value judgment they can give about me. That's the worth or the merit I have. So they are using that to give value judgment about me, and that will be used to make decision about me. So when I look at it, I say, wow, these people have really evaluated in the real sense. When I know what it takes to evaluate, and I gave them an applaud. So all teachers that are doing evaluation, before you can evaluate, don't just evaluate haphazardly. Don't give value judgment. Ensure you test well, you measure well, you assess well, then you can now base your decision on the result of your assessment or your measurement or your test, back up with other what? Qualitative evidence.